Hi, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Welcome to another edition of Half Hour on the Hill, my regular cable show to let constituents of the Middlesex and Worcester District know what I'm up to and also to highlight the work of local leaders. I'm very pleased to have an exemplary local leader on affordable housing as well as many other issues, Alan Edinberg, who's on the Westborough Select Board, as well as a trustee on the Westborough Affordable Housing Trust. So Alan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and of course, unfortunately, I no longer represent Westborough, but I still feel like I'm still getting to know and learning about things and have an interest in Westborough. I appreciate Westborough taking the lead on so many issues, and I think one of the issues during my time representing Westborough was that it really has taken the lead on affordable housing issues, which not every suburban or Metro West community has done. And so you and I have had conversations, I think, throughout your time on the select board as well as the trust about, what is Westborough working on, and then obviously, how can the state better partner support Westborough. But if you could talk a little bit about what you've been working on, say, like the past year.
So over the past year, the town, and I'll focus a lot on what the Westborough Affordable Housing Trust, the trust is doing, is really focused on ramping up efforts around affordable housing on a number of fronts. Our trust is relatively new. We were created in the fall of 2020. We started operating in 2021.
Yep.
We're fortunate to have had some good initial funding sources.
Sure.
And so we actively have acquired 2 properties in town, single-family lots. One is an old building that had been vacant due to the owner passing away with no heirs for 7 years. And so that's a tear down and rebuild. And that we're working on a little bit of cleanup on the property before it'll be handed over to a developer to construct, and that'll be sold as a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single-family home.
Excellent.
In about the $220,000, $230,000 price range. We also just acquired 1.2 acres just off our historic downtown. There's currently a single-family home on it. We see redevelopment of that property, 4 to 6 cottage-style, smaller single-family homes and almost a garden-style configuration, where we can do a mix of affordable housing for families and moderate income, age-restricted, so that our senior citizens have a place to downsize.
Absolutely. And I just have to say, you're saying multifamily and family brings a smile to my face, because there was actually just an editorial in the Boston Globe this Sunday about the fact that often the suburban communities are only doing affordable housing for seniors and not for families. So I really appreciate Westborough doing that.
And we realize there's a need for both.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
when we talk about affordable housing, we talk about affordable housing capital letters, which is the state-defined subsidized housing inventory. But we also talk affordable housing in terms of low and moderate income accessible housing, even if it doesn't qualify for SHI, that we need to be involved in stimulating that kind of activity as well. In creating the trust, we did a needs assessment, a housing needs assessment and strategy document, which reads like almost like the executive summary of a housing production plan.
Sure. And was that reaching out to residents about needs?
We did reach out to residents about needs, but we did a lot of data analysis based on the 2010 census and the annual estimates as far as what type of needs. And so we saw a need for family housing. We saw a need, even at that point, for senior housing. At the time we did that report, there were 200 households where the head of household was 62 plus on the waiting list for affordable rental units with the state. And so we know there's a need there. And so our approach is to not just focus on one need, but focus on everything. I know it's not really focusing, but to mix and match our program. So in addition to those 2 small projects, which are a good way for us to learn and get our feet wet with the whole process, we've struck up a partnership with Westborough's Housing Authority. They own land that is developable. We help them get a technical grant to determine that, yes, it could be developed with zoning and with water and sewage and all that fun stuff, that it can support it. And so we're working with them to construct net new units
on Westborough Housing Authority lands.
On their property,
Wonderful.
expanding their inventory of 62 plus affordable rentals, in part potentially to allow residents of the existing facilities to move into that so that those facilities could be renovated or rebuilt.
That's excellent.
As they're starting to age out, and sort of looking at those types of plans.
And since we're here in Acton, I understand that you've been in touch, or the Westborough Housing Authority has been in touch with the Acton Housing Authority.
Yes. So several of our trustees, a number of our trustees met
Yeah.
with the director and trustees of the Acton Housing Authority. They're like our heroes.
Kelly Cronin, thank you very much.
Yes,
Yep,
she is a
yep.
hero, in part because the current development work, McManus Manor, I believe,
Yes.
is an incredibly creative approach and a lot of hard work. And it almost scares us how much hard work and how much effort goes into it. But to come up with the concept, the funding, the town of Acton's support for a 30B exemption home rule petition that will lower the cost of the development and make it competitive with private development is all are all efforts that we're looking to model our activities after. It's been a great learning curve.
Absolutely.
And inspirational, in part because when we formed the trust, we kept hearing there's no money or desire for affordable housing to be built by public housing authorities. And then boom, Acton appears on the screen saying, wait a minute, they got money. And it's a great project that was based on a needs assessment for the community, with some enhanced local preferences as well.
Yes.
Which is, that's a politically sensitive issue, but it's how do you strike the balance between the broader community, the regional need and the statewide need versus the local need.
Exactly. And it's such an important thing, if I may emphasize, is that it is possible for housing authorities to have local preference. I think there's a sense that there isn't. It is tricky, but it is possible.
Yeah, and it has to be navigated, and you have to demonstrate that what you're doing is fair.
Yep.
And isn't counterproductive to broader objectives. And
Exactly.
That's a fine, not always well-defined line you need to walk, and Acton's doing that very successfully. So we're looking and thinking, what else can we learn, and what else can we model, and see Acton as a best practice.
Absolutely. And I am saying to all the housing authorities in my district, and I know a lot of them are very small with just a few employees, if even that, is encouraging housing authorities to figure out how to build more public housing, whether on their land or land that perhaps the town or city has.
Yeah.
That's great.
So,
talk to me, because this is when I represented Westborough, about Chauncey Lake, or Lake Chauncey. I always forget, which is it?
It's it goes either way.
It goes either way. Okay, good. Phew.
I call it Lake Chauncey.
Lake Chauncey.
But Pulte Homes. So stepping back very briefly, the town of Westborough acquired a large tract of land, hundreds of acres, from the state when Westborough State Hospital closed and was deemed surplus. And we did a town-wide charrette for best use, and it was decided that that would be a great location for multifamily senior living. Or other types of development. Pulte Homes of New England won an extensive bidding process. They're constructing 14 buildings over time, totaling 700 1 and 2 bedroom condos.
It's quite
55
big.
plus. It's
I've been there
quite
recently.
a large development.
It is, yeah.
And it's going well for them. I believe they're on track or slightly ahead of their original schedule, even with the impacts of COVID. And with that, the special permit in the zoning said it was 55 plus, but no 18 under permanent residents to protect the schools, in part because Westborough had another development that had come in, a larger than anticipated number of school-age children.
Okay.
We had just finished $60 million in new school construction. It's like, okay, the town's not going to go for having to build another school or to add on to schools again. Between the time that that project was permitted and the time they were ready to have their first certificates of occupancy on their first building, the state changed the application of one of its policies that said you can't restrict under 18 unless you're 62 plus.
And this was DHCD now, which is now the Office of Housing and Livable Communities.
And there were some projects that the change was applied to based on the timing. There are other projects, similar projects, that it weren't. But we found ourselves losing 70 units of affordable housing Well, there were
Yeah.
going to be 700 units added, so that was significant.
Yep.
We set out to negotiate with Pulte, and we were successful. The strategy was, let's negotiate something with them to mitigate that impact for the town, and jointly bring it before the Zoning Board of Appeals, so that we
Sure.
could demonstrate the town was getting relief and they were getting relief, and it was workable for both.
And that's such an important point, because I think one of the things that always surprises me is when developers come in and dictate, well, this is the only way, that we can see this development. And I am always surprised at how municipal officials sort of give away that power versus the power of negotiation.
Yeah, and you have, I guess, the challenge is really understanding where your leverage was.
Sure.
And for us, the timing was fortuitous, because with Pulte looking for certificates of occupancy, they had sold units and had closing dates.
Yep.
And so our leverage was that they couldn't close, and they were now paying penalties and temporary living for people who had bought units. They were seeing a financial impact.
Sure.
And the way their business model, that would also, any delay in occupancy in the first building or the first two buildings would delay construction of the third building, and so on.
Absolutely.
And so we had a little bit of leverage. The town assessor did some great work and said, market rate versus affordable, this is how much new income Pulte will get over the life of the project, and present value analysis. We started asking for that money. They came back with a much, 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 much lower number. And we ended someplace in the middle. The end result was the town and Pulte agreed to a total settlement of $9 million to be used for affordable housing and other projects for seniors. And so that money goes into a stabilization trust fund of the town, and the housing trust can ask for that money at town meeting.
Okay. Which would go to build these other
Which could go to build
projects
other
you mentioned.
units or subsidize other units. To date, we've acquired the first three payments, for so about a little over $1.8 million. There was some other mitigation in the initial special permit, which over time will mean we had our first payment of about $600,000 on that, which comes to the trust as well. And so we're fortunate that we have funds.
Sure.
We just became a CPA community. Fiscal year 24 is our first year
Congratulations.
with the surcharge. So we'll be looking towards annual town meeting in March to see if there are funds, what we might use them for. And then the town recently settled with a developer
Sure.
whose nature of development, they would never be able to comply with SHI regulations for pricing their units. And so we reached a settlement, and fall town meeting, October 16th, there's a vote to transfer that out of free cash into the trust, because
Sure.
those funds can only be used for new affordable housing development.
And before we take a break, just curious, for those homes at Lake Chauncey, those that are affordable, what percent affordable, what AMI?
In the Lake Chauncey development, there are no designated affordable units.
Okay.
It would have been at 80% AMI.
Okay.
But we'll be looking to develop those units elsewhere in town and subsidize. And part of that is the the partnership with the Westborough Housing Authority. They have other land.
Sure.
And we've been working with the town, and the town has a land use prioritization committee that we've started working with to identify other parcels that
Great.
we can look for areas of development. We're currently also on this fall town meeting warrant looking to consolidate the Housing Partnership Committee, which in Westborough has been a bit idle, into the Housing Trust, so that we're in a position to work with developers
Sure.
to identify and even encourage a larger percentage of affordable units in their new multifamily developments.
That's a lot of updates. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with the second half, interviewing Alan Edinberg, Westborough Select Board.
The impact of a meal goes well beyond feeding our bodies. Food can open endless possibilities for people to thrive. Because when people are fed, futures are nourished. Everyone deserves to live a full life. And with your help, together we can end hunger. Join the movement at feedingamerica.org/actnow.
Hi, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Welcome to the second half of Half Hour on the Hill. I have with me Alan Edinberg, Westborough Select Board member and trustee of the Westborough Affordable Housing Trust. And Alan, we were talking about some of the projects that Westborough is doing, which is really impressive. As a result of the pandemic, whether pandemic policies or ARPA money or other federal money coming in, my sense was a lot of communities created affordable housing trusts like Westborough, but also are trying to model programs that were created during the pandemic. And one of them is the Mass Dreams programs. Is that correct?
Correct. So we're currently designing a first-time homebuyers program,
Okay.
which for income qualified households would provide grants or loans to help with down payment and closing costs. And the goal is there to help families either get into affordable housing or be able to step in, if they don't qualify for affordable housing capitalized, to help them get into a market rate home that they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And this would be for a certain number of people in town to apply for? Or?
Yeah, we're going to start, we're setting aside a certain amount of funds, so we're looking to do a pilot program for the first year to get a sense of demand and need, at which point we'd look at, analyze the data and say, if we're going to continue with the program permanently, what funding do we need for it to make it sustainable, and how many, grants or loans we would do per year.
That's great. That's great. And then how about capital funding? Is Westborough looking at capital funding program? Or?
Yeah, we looked at Sudbury's Housing Trust, which has a very successful capital maintenance, capital repair grant program.
Okay.
So again, income qualified households can get grants or no interest loans
Okay.
to make capital
sort of moderate,
repairs. So
low
new
income
roof,
homeowners. Yeah.
new air conditioning or heating systems needed. The goal there is to help families stay in their home, so that someone who, whether it's the ability to age at home situation for seniors, or even just families who are looking at saying, the house needs a new roof and three of the windows are leaking and we can't afford to make the repairs, and so we're going to move, right?
And I have to say, that's some of the saddest interactions I have with constituents, where I go to someone's house and clearly the house is in disrepair. And if they could just get the roof fixed or the plumbing upgraded, they could stay in their house versus, going somewhere that, might be, even less housing stable.
Yes, and if we can provide, in many cases, it can be a grant. It can also be a zero interest loan with no amortization. So it's nothing out of pocket, and if and when they sell or transfer the property, those monies are paid back.
That's excellent.
And so it doesn't really impact the equity that they've built in the house in any significant way either. So it's a win-win. We help someone with housing stability in a safe, healthy place to live.
Yep.
And keep that housing stock healthy.
That's
so that
great.
It's ready for the next household when it transfers.
And so what we talked about just now, a lot of that was due to the ARPA money or federal money that came in. For the most part, ARPA money has been spent. We're looking at an affordable housing bond bill that I'm advocating for. It's been 5 years since a bond bill has passed in Massachusetts. We do it every 5 years. What would be most helpful to Westborough to have in this affordable housing bond bill, which we expect Governor Healy to file soon?
Ideally, first and foremost, I know it's a focus of the effort, is funding for public housing agencies.
Yes.
There's a backlog of maintenance that needs to be done, repairs, renovation. A lot of those properties are aging out. Just, a 70-year-old building has issues. And, maybe you can renovate it, maybe it needs to be replaced, but the money has to be there. And the creation of net new affordable housing through the agencies. And in part, we look at Westborough. Westborough is what's known as a small housing authority. They have 110 units under management. Because they're small, there's no operating subsidy.
Yep.
So they live by the reduced rents. They get hand to mouth.
Yeah.
Makes it very difficult to operate efficiently. Increasing the size of that housing authority above the 200 unit threshold to become a mid-size, opens up other funding opportunities. It provides operating revenue that provides stability. It's easier to maintain and preserve the affordable housing, as well as meet, it's not a latent demand, the demand for more affordable housing options and different types of affordable housing options.
Absolutely. How about infrastructure? Is that something that would help build more affordable housing or housing in Westborough?
Absolutely. Westborough, like many communities, is constrained by water use and wastewater capacity. So funding to help the infrastructure in those regards is great. The projects we're looking at jointly with the Westborough Housing Authority are on land that is already owned. There's already a roadway there. But if, for other communities or other properties when we might look at, land prep,
Sure.
Extension of utilities, extension of roadways and rights of way, all of that type of infrastructure is there.
Sure. And water infrastructure.
And water sewer infrastructure, electrical, support for electrical infrastructure,
Right.
Internet access. It all has to come together. So that's definitely key as well.
And I remember you mentioned McManus Manor
Yes.
in Acton, so that's slated to begin to be developed soon. 41 units of low-income housing for seniors or people with disabilities. A critical piece of that was the sewer infrastructure, which we were able to get, I think, about a $3 million Mass Works grant to connect it to the rest of the sewer system in Acton. So that infrastructure piece can really make a critical difference for affordable housing, which is tough on the margins.
Very much so. And currently, Westborough is going through an entire wastewater analysis in that we have no allocation left for multifamily housing.
Yep.
And so until we go through the process and Mass DEP can reallocate or allow us to increase our capacity, we're really hamstrung in what we can build and how.
Absolutely.
And that we can replace existing use with comparable new use, but any additional use at this point would have to be septic systems, which, when you get past a certain capacity, get very expensive.
Right, exactly.
And require a level of ongoing maintenance. You want, as we look to create affordable housing, it's not just constructed, but constructed in a way that it is as cost effective to operate and maintain over the long term.
Absolutely.
We want that as well.
And you mentioned earlier about the consultation from the Acton Housing Authority to the Westborough Housing Authority is, would technical assistance for Westborough be helpful in this bond bill as far as providing more guidance to towns?
Technical assistance would be great. We tap into it wherever it's available.
Yeah.
The Mass Housing Partnership is a great resource for housing authorities and housing trusts, and has a series of technical assistance grants. It's very clear that there's more demand than there is supply.
Right.
And it can really short circuit and accelerate the speed of a project.
Absolutely.
To be able to bring in a consulting firm with experience that can say, okay, we can get you to a conceptual design and a funding plan and an operating cost and a budget quickly. If you can do that in 3 or 6 months instead of 12 months, then you've actually saved 2 or 3 years out of the project cycle.
And you mentioned Mass Housing Partnership. Last week, actually, I was at the groundbreaking for a 42-unit multifamily in Hudson, where Clark Ziegler from Mass Housing Partnership was there, as well as Roger Herzog from CDAC. You're talking about a consultant, is you need to piece together all these different sources of funding and tax credits to make any project, likely. A low-income tax credit, DHCD grant, or Office of Housing and Livable Communities, a bank loan, and then these quasi-public agencies in Massachusetts.
Quasi-public agencies, then there's federal tax credits, there's state tax credits. Is it local initiative program qualified? Has the town contributed enough that it qualifies for additional activity? There are a lot of programs out there navigating which ones are best, and helping even with the preparation, the very technical preparation necessary to apply to and manage those grants. We're a housing trust. We're volunteers.
Right.
We're not full-time experts in affordable housing, so the technical assistance to provide that subject matter expertise is critical to our success.
Absolutely. And then I think at the end of the day, I think it does take a local contribution. So you mentioned that Westborough recently passed the Community Preservation Act.
Yep.
So do you know how much money that's approximately will bring in for the town? Or
We haven't calculated it
Okay,
yet because
I know
we
you
just literally last Friday or Thursday, the town assessor posted the final valuations.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and our town meeting's October 16th. So once we know the final budget, we'll know that. We're a very low surcharge. We're 0.5% surcharge.
Oh, is that right?
As
Okay.
a starting point. But in addition to those funds, there's that 10% minimum that comes in.
that must go
And-
for housing, historic preservation, or open
Well,
space?
yeah, 10% each for those.
Sure.
So if all we get is the 10% for affordable housing this first year, how much would that be? What would we use it for? But it's a starting point. But we're also fortunate because of the ZBA settlement, and the legal settlement, the mitigation funds, that we have funds available to subsidize significant projects right now.
And that's great, because I think at the end of the day, to get to that yes of a development, at the end of the day, the town or city, I think, needs to often chip in.
And the ability for housing trusts to move quickly.
Right.
Which is a great part of the law that lets us exist, gives us a lot of flexibility to take advantage of opportunities.
Absolutely. So certainly, state grants, infrastructure funding. Are there other things you would like to see in this affordable housing bond bill? You mentioned public housing authorities too, which is a big focus of mine.
I guess, continuing funding some of the creative subsidies and even some of the no interest and low interest loan programs
Sure.
that developers as well as public housing agencies and authorities could tap into would be great. Beyond that, I think, public housing rules and regulations, affordable housing, have not changed in the Commonwealth for probably 50 years. I'd love to see a task force take a step back and say, let's look at the needs, let's look strategically going forward the next 50 years, what's working, what could we improve on, what else can and should we be doing to support housing, not just affordable housing, but housing affordability, Commonwealth-wide.
Sure. Well, we will definitely be pushing for that. And Alan, thank you so much for coming on the Half Hour on the Hill.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for really your courage and commitment to affordable housing in Westborough, because there's not many municipal officials who do that. So I appreciate it, even though I no longer represent Westborough.
I'm glad to share the knowledge and open, if other people are interested in affordable housing, I'm open to networking and to sharing what we've learned and helping make connections with other people who know what they're doing.
Thanks so much. So thanks for joining us to Half Hour on the Hill. I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Please stay tuned for this. Thank you.